Back in the day, when summer evenings stretched long and the world seemed slower, your grandparents knew how to keep their porches peaceful. They relied on the garden itself, planting flowers whose scents carried invisible shields against biting insects. These blossoms carried oils and aromas that turned mosquitoes back, creating yards where families could sit, talk, and rest without interruption. Here are 25 flowers Grandpa used to make mosquitoes instantly flee. Lavender. Grandpa never needed mosquito sprays when rows of lavender stood guard by the porch. This old Mediterranean herb carried a fragrance so strong, mosquitoes lost their way before they even landed. Its oils, rich in linalool and camphor, confused the little pests until they gave up and left. He always said lavender liked hardship more than pampering. Dry soil, rocky beds, and blazing sun made it tougher, its scent sharper, and its protection stronger. The purple blooms weren't just pretty, they filled jars for sachets, flavored stews, and brought calm to sleepless nights. Women of the house tucked sprigs into linen chests to keep moths away, while bees hovered happily over the blossoms. It was a sentinel and a perfume all rolled into one, holding its post through long summer evenings when mosquitoes swarmed thickest. Citronella Grass. Long before citronella candles sat on store shelves, your grandparents had clumps of citronella grass growing tall by the back fence. The blades swayed in the breeze, releasing a lemony scent that pushed mosquitoes back without a drop of kerosene. They'd rub a crushed leaf between his palms and swipe it across his neck and arms before sitting out in the dusk. That simple ritual worked better than any store-bought spray. The grass grew thick and towering, its clumps reaching as high as his waist, a wall of green holding back the evening swarm. Your grandma would cut it for steeping in oil, making her own repellent mixtures for the family that lasted weeks. Marigolds. Grandpa never let a summer pass without neat rows of marigolds tucked between beans, corn, and cucumbers. To most, they were cheery flowers, bright and inexpensive. But Grandpa knew they were soldiers, producing pyrethrum compounds that mosquitoes couldn't bear. He'd say the worse the soil, the stronger their bite against pests, and he planted them in patches where nothing else seemed to thrive. Their blooms lasted all season, splashing yellow and orange across the garden while guarding vegetables from aphids, nematodes, and whiteflies too. Grandma would snip the petals, scatter them into salads, or dry them for tonic teas. Marigolds formed a living fence, bright to cheer the eyes, and were strong enough to keep the bloodsuckers at bay. Basil. Sweet basil wasn't just for the kitchen in Grandpa's day. He knew its leaves released oils, eugenol, citronellol, and linalool that mosquitoes despised. Every brush of a hand, every harvest for sauce or stew, sent out a new wave of scent that kept the pests from landing. He'd grow lemon basil near the paths, African blue by the doorstep, and holy basil in pots, each variety humming with its own protective strength. The trick was warmth and sun. He waited until the soil warmed in May, then planted deep, watered steady, and pinched buds to keep leaves tender. By midsummer, basil formed fragrant mounds that filled the air with sharp sweetness and invisible shields. Guests thought he simply loved herbs, but he knew the real secret. They were a living repellent. Peppermint. Grandpa swore peppermint was nature's smoke bomb against mosquitoes. He'd point to the menthol oil packed in every leaf, saying it scrambled the insects' senses until they couldn't find their prey. He never grew it loose in the garden. He knew too well how it would creep underground and take over every bed. Instead, he lined buckets and clay pots with peppermint, placing them where folks sat in the evenings. The strong scent rolled out as soon as you brushed against the leaves, cooling the air and driving mosquitoes away. On hot afternoons, he'd steep it for tea, a tonic as refreshing as it was protective. Even in damp corners where mosquitoes bred, peppermint thrived, its roots gripping the wet soil, its stems rising in defiance. Rosemary. Rosemary bushes grew like small hedges, their woody stems lined with needle-like leaves that held secrets mosquitoes hated. The oils, camphor, cineole, and alpha-pinene rose from every sprig, creating an invisible barrier that left summer evenings surprisingly calm. You could cut branches and toss them on the barbecue coals, letting the smoke drift across the yard, a double gift of flavor and protection. Rosemary was tough as nails, thriving in the hot sun with little water. Grandpa warned never to pamper it, claiming drought made the oil sharper and the plant stronger. He shaped it into tidy mounds that looked as handsome as they were useful. And Grandma never let a Sunday roast go by without snapping off a few stems. Even in winter, pots of rosemary came indoors, filling the kitchen with their sharp scent. Catnip. While the cats in Grandpa's yard rolled in bliss, the mosquitoes kept their distance. Catnip, with its high dose of nepetalactone, worked like a charm. He planted it in barrels and wooden crates, knowing too well how it would sprawl over everything if given the chance. On cool evenings, he'd crumble a handful of dried catnip leaves into the fire pit, the smoke rising in a haze that drove mosquitoes away while amusing the cats. The plant was a hardy companion, tolerating dry soil and neglect, but still producing fragrant leaves and small, pale blossoms. Women in the family brewed it as a calming tea, soothing both nerves and stomachs. Children laughed watching cats tumble through the patch, but Grandpa knew those same plants kept his porch clear of buzzing intruders. Lemon balm. Grandpa called lemon balm the poor man's citronella, but he loved it all the same. Its crinkled leaves gave off a clean, lemony perfume that mosquitoes detested. He let it spread along the garden edge, a natural carpet that released its oils whenever someone brushed past. When children ran barefoot, their ankles came back scented, guarded from bites without them knowing it. He brewed lemon balm tea on warm nights, calming the mind while keeping pests at bay. This plant could thrive in sun or shade. In dry patches or wet corners, it cared little, and that made it invaluable. But Grandpa kept a careful hand, for he knew lemon balm could run rampant if ignored. He'd snip it often, hanging bundles from rafters or stuffing sachets for cupboards. Scented geraniums. Few plants looked as dainty yet worked as hard as scented geraniums. Their leaves carried oils of citronellal and geraniol, the same compounds bottled in expensive repellents. But in his garden, they came free, rising from pots along the veranda, their scent intensifying each time a breeze stirred or a hand brushed past. Some carried a lemon note, others hinted of rose, and all sent mosquitoes fleeing. Grandma clipped sprigs for her windowsills, and when guests arrived, the air seemed fresher, safer, touched with fragrance instead of chemicals. The pink and white blooms weren't showy, but they brightened the place, and Grandpa appreciated that they pulled double duty, beauty, and defense together. In hot summers, he carried pots of geraniums to the porch, surrounding the seating with a living barrier. Alliums. In early spring, before many plants woke from winter, Grandpa's alliums rose with their sturdy stems and globe-shaped blossoms. These ornamental relatives of onions carried sulfur compounds in their leaves and flowers, compounds mosquitoes loathed. While the blossoms dazzled with their starry purple heads, unseen vapors drifted about, deterring pests before summer fully set in. He planted them in clusters, knowing the display would be bold and the protection wider. The stalks stood tall like sentries, resisting deer, rodents, and mosquitoes alike. Children marveled at the strange fireworks of flowers, while Grandpa knew they were doing their job quietly. Alliums needed little care once settled, good soil, sun, and time. Every few years, he divided the bulbs, replanting them to extend the line of defense across new corners of the yard. Pennyroyal. Your grandparents treated pennyroyal with a kind of respect. They knew its creeping mats carried one of the strongest mosquito repellents nature ever made. A brush of the foot released a sharp, pungent scent that drove the insects away instantly. They used it like a living carpet, tucking it between stepping stones and around benches, so every step sent protective oils into the air. Pennyroyal was hardy, spreading through runners until the ground looked quilted in green. Yet your grandparents always warned the children not to nibble its leaves, for its strength made it unsafe in teas. Still, they valued its toughness. Once established, it needed little water, and no weed dared push through its dense cover. On summer nights, pennyroyal's low growth formed an invisible shield at ankle level, stopping mosquitoes before they reached higher. Bee balm. Your grandparents called bee balm the firework flower, its red, pink, or purple bursts rising tall above the beds. Bees, butterflies, and hummingbirds flocked to it, while mosquitoes avoided it entirely. Its leaves, full of thymol and carvacrol, carried a medicinal sharpness that worked as both a healing herb and a repellent. Native to North America, bee balm seemed born for their garden, spreading easily and returning each spring without fuss. They brewed the leaves into tea when cold struck, and dried bundles hung in the pantry gave the kitchen a herbal tang. In midsummer, the flowers stood in blazing color while keeping evenings free of pests. They said bee balm was a friend to pollinators and a foe to bloodsuckers, exactly the kind of ally every garden needed. Lemon eucalyptus. Tall and graceful, lemon eucalyptus trees were not common in every yard, but your grandparents knew their secret power. The leaves released oils rich in PMD, a compound so effective that even the military tested it for tropical missions. On hot days, the scent grew stronger, a sharp citrus cloud that mosquitoes simply could not cross. They planted them at the edge of the property where they grew quickly, their pale bark peeling and leaves shimmering silver green in the light. Visitors admired their beauty, never realizing they were also guardians. On summer evenings, your grandparents would crush a leaf in their hand and rub it across their arms, swearing it worked better than any store-bought lotion. The trees stood tall year after year, hardy in warm climates, spreading shade and scent together. American Beautyberry. Nothing in the garden turned heads quite like the American Beautyberry. Its branches sagged under clusters of jewel-toned purple berries that gleamed like glass beads in the fall. But their beauty was only half the story. The leaves carried unique compounds, calicarpinol and intermediol, that formed protective zones up to 15 feet wide. Your grandparents marveled that soldiers once relied on this shrub in the swamps, brushing crushed leaves on their skin to keep the insects away. They planted them near the porch where their presence meant a bite-free evening, no matter how humid the air grew. Birds feasted on the berries, and neighbors admired the showy clusters, but your grandparents saw them as their strongest allies. They needed little care, thriving in clay, sand, sun, or shade, and never asking for fertilizer. Tansy. Your grandparents said tansy was the old farmer's secret weapon. Its yellow button flowers looked cheerful, but the leaves carried thujone, a compound that mosquitoes hated with a vengeance. They grew it at the back fence, where its tall stems swayed in the wind, sending invisible waves of protection across the yard. Old books told how medieval cooks wrapped meat in tansy to keep flies off, and your grandparents liked the history almost as much as the plant itself. Still, they handled it with care, knowing it could easily take over if left unchecked. Each autumn, they hung dried bundles above doors and windows, saying they worked year-round to ward off pests. When planted in the sun, tansy thrived with barely a drink of water. Lemon thyme. Your grandparents always tucked lemon thyme near the garden steps, where its tiny leaves released a sharp citrus tang the moment a boot brushed by. This low, creeping herb looked delicate, but its oils rich in thymol packed enough power to rattle any mosquito daring to fly close. They called it a living carpet of defense, perfect for lining paths and borders. When evenings grew long, they would snip a handful to season roasted chicken or stew, adding both flavor and pest protection to supper. Lemon thyme thrived in poor, rocky soil where other plants sulked. In dry summers, it hardly flinched, hugging the ground tight and sending its fragrance into the warm air. Neighbors admired the tiny blossoms, pale and understated, not realizing how much work they were doing behind the scenes. Clove. Clove was not grown in every garden, but some grandparents had a knack for doing the unusual. In a sheltered corner, they raised a young clove tree, its glossy leaves hiding oils heavy with eugenol, the same compound bottled into repellents and liniments. They would say a crushed clove bud was worth 10 sprays from the store, sharp enough to send mosquitoes into retreat. The blossoms eventually hardened into the spice Grandma treasured, filling jars that flavored pickles, mulled cider, and holiday hams. Yet their minds were always on its other talent, protection. They carried dried cloves in their pockets, ready to crush one when working outdoors in buggy weather. The tree itself loved warmth and patience, thriving slowly, but rewarding with leaves and buds of true strength. Bay Laurel. The bay laurel by the porch looked like a prim shrub, evergreen and dignified. But those leaves, when crushed, gave off a pungent aroma that mosquitoes dared not challenge. Grandma plucked bay leaves for her soups, slipping them into pots where they softened beans and lent flavor to broths. But your grandparents valued their presence in the garden, where a ring of potted laurels created a protective circle. On hot afternoons, they would rub a fresh leaf along their collar, swearing it kept the evening peaceful. Bay laurel needed little more than sun and a steady trim to keep its shape, growing gracefully year after year. To visitors, it looked ornamental, perhaps culinary, but your grandparents knew its deeper worth. Mint. While peppermint held pride of place in pots, your grandparents never forgot its kin, spearmint, applemint, and more. Each variety spread with relentless energy, and each carried menthol and aromatic oils that set mosquitoes scattering. They let spearmint roam along a ditch, where the damp soil kept it lush. Children picked handfuls for chewing, savoring its cool bite, while Grandma steeped sprigs into jugs of iced tea. Every breeze across that patch sent a clean, sharp fragrance rolling into the air, a fragrance mosquitoes despised. Your grandparents kept a watchful eye on mint, trimming it often so it would not smother other beds. But they valued it highly, calling it both medicine and shield. It cooled fevers, settled stomachs, and lined the summer air with an invisible barrier. Feverfew. Your grandparents' feverfew patch glowed with daisy-like flowers, cheerful white petals circling golden centers. Behind their charm lay parthenolide and pyrethrum-like compounds that mosquitoes found unbearable. Old herbalists swore by feverfew for headaches and fevers, but your grandparents planted it for summer evenings when the blossoms held back the swarms. They would cut fresh stems and place them in jars on the porch where their scent drifted around like a natural screen. The plants reseeded themselves easily, scattering across borders and cracks, coming back year after year with little fuss. Feverfew thrived in full sun, needing little water, and stood resilient even in poor soil. Though delicate in appearance, it carried a strength that surprised visitors. Grandma sometimes dried its leaves for remedies, but they loved it most in the ground, simple, bright, and stubbornly protective. Sage. Your grandparents' sage bushes sat low and silvery, their leaves soft with down, their scent earthy and strong. They planted them in rows near the fire pit, knowing they did more than season pork or beans. On summer nights, they tossed a bundle of dried sage onto the coals, the smoke curling upward, thick and pungent. Mosquitoes vanished in moments, chased off by the aromatic oils rising into the night air. They called it smoke medicine, just as old settlers once did. During the day, sage grew happily in poor soil, sun-drenched and sturdy, unbothered by drought. Grandma gathered leaves for cooking and remedies, stuffing cupboards with bundles that flavored meals and freshened linen. To your grandparents, sage was a double-duty plant, food for the table and a ward against pests. Wormwood. Wormwood stood like a ghost in your grandparents' garden, tall and silver gray, its feathery leaves giving off a bitter scent no insect dared cross. It was the plant of old remedies and legends, once brewed into absinthe, once hung in doorways to repel moths and mosquitoes alike. They never drank it, but they valued its power. A crushed leaf between the fingers released thujone, sharp and biting, enough to drive away pests at once. They kept wormwood at the far edge of the plot, where its strong character would not overshadow gentler herbs. Each summer, it grew tall and proud, shimmering in the sunlight, a sentinel with no need for coddling. It survived poor soils, dry weather, and neglect, and still it offered protection. Neighbors sometimes frowned at its bitter scent, but your grandparents saw its worth, a stubborn guardian ready to defend the homestead against every buzzing invader. Tea tree. In a corner warmed by sun, your grandparents kept a pot of tea tree, its narrow leaves shimmering green, holding oils that worked like bottled strength. From Australia came its fame, where generations crushed the leaves to make healing washes that also turned away biting insects. They prized it for both gifts. A snapped twig rubbed along their arms brought hours of freedom from the swarm. The oils, sharp and medicinal, carried through the warm air, creating a zone mosquitoes avoided. Tea tree liked water at first, but once rooted, it carried itself with quiet resilience. Your grandparents called it the doctor's plant, good for cuts, rashes, and evenings by the porch alike. Few neighbors recognized it, but those who sat with them noticed the peace. No swatting, no itching, just a calm ally against buzzing intruders. Garlic. Your grandparents' garlic beds were never empty, the pointed shoots rising each spring in neat rows. Most folks thought of garlic only for the kitchen, but Grandpa knew better. Its strong sulfur compounds drifted into the air and soil, making mosquitoes turn tail before they drew near. They would say the scent seeped from the leaves even before the bulbs were ready, guarding the yard quietly. By midsummer, the bulbs fattened, destined for roasts, pickles, and stews. But the real work was already done, keeping evenings free of the buzzing menace. Some nights they crushed a clove, rubbing it along boots and sleeves, swearing it worked as well as any lotion. Garlic thrived in their sandy soil, needing little care besides planting deep and harvesting on time. Its flavor fed the family. Its power protected them. Lemongrass. Your grandparents grew lemongrass in stout clumps by the garden gate, their long blades arching like fountains of green. When the wind moved through, a clean lemony perfume lifted into the air, rich with citral, the very oil that mosquitoes despised most. They sliced stalks for broth and tea, but they also kept the leaves for their hidden talent. Crushed and rubbed on the skin, they worked like a natural shield, fragrant and refreshing. In warm summers, the clumps swelled waist-high, a graceful border that doubled as defense. In colder months, they dug a few and brought them indoors, pots lined near the kitchen window, their scent filling the house. Visitors admired their beauty, never guessing they were standing before a living barrier. Which of these old mosquito fighters would you plant first in your own garden? Let us know in the comments below. If you learned something new today, make sure to hit that subscribe button. See you in the next one.